Well, great to have you here. If we haven't met yet, my name is Dan, my wife Hannah, and I get the honor of leading this incredible church. And as Graham was saying, we are launching Alpha today. Something that we've been passionate about for many years is this wonderful course produced in England, Holy Trinity Brompton. Nikki Gumbel has been wrote and perfecting this course over many, many years. And we've done it in many ways and different night services, cafe times, things as a church. We even have another church right now using our building Monday nights to do the Alpha course, Beachside Church. You don't have a building, so they're using it for their church, which is wonderful because we believe in this course and we believe that people get saved and experience Jesus through this course. And that is really the goal of this course. It's I remember an old statement says, the goal is to help feelers think and thinkers feel. And I think the Alpha just does that so well, because if you're here and you've been in church a long time, but you're not sure why, today I'd like to actually go through this topic of who is Jesus. And I actually want you to know that it's not just something you were raised in or something you decided to follow, that this person of Jesus truly changed the world. And I want us, church, to be confident that we do serve and worship and live for the one true God. And if you're here today, and it's such an honor to have you, and you don't call yourself a Christian, number one, thank you for being here. And number two, I hope you don't feel forced into anything today. That's not the goal. The goal is for us to explore the topic of, yet again, this person who changed the world. Let's look at, as Graham said, his friend, if I did believe that, I couldn't stop telling people. Let's look at the reality of this person who a third of the world right now would say is the one true God. Another third of the world, roughly, will say that he was definitely existed and some kind of moral teacher, religious teacher, a wonderful man. And another third of the world will say they don't believe in him, but maybe use his name more than anyone when they kick their foot or burn their finger. Who is Jesus? How do we know, first and foremost, that he existed, to talk to the third of the world who might say he didn't exist? Well, there's evidence outside the New Testament. So outside of church and outside of the Bible, there is a significant amount of evidence to show that Jesus was a real person who actually walked this earth. Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius speak about him in their writings, but there's a famous one. We've got a whole book upstairs by this Jewish historian called Josephus, and writing very closely to the time Jesus was alive, said, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it is lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles." Josephus then goes to write about his life, works, and crucifixion. So outside the New Testament, we have many credible sources to at least show that this wonderful man walked the earth. Then there's evidence of the New Testament, right? And I know if you're here and you don't call yourself a Christian, I know the very common thing that we would be saying right now, it's that we can't trust it. It was written so long ago in this different language. How can we trust it today? And it was, 27 books from multiple authors in a different country, in a different era. How can we trust it? And as we look at right now, there's actually this not Christian or religious or faith-filled method. There's this scientific method called textual criticism. And it's used to explore ancient manuscripts about the validity of how can we know if we're reading something that's a copy of an original ancient manuscript, how can we trust it? This textual criticism is used on every piece of ancient writing. And there's two questions that have to be asked about ancient writings. How quickly after the original was written was the earliest copy made? First question. So the original manuscript or piece of writing is there. How quickly was the first copy made? And then how many copies of the original do we have? I can't even pronounce these words, but there are definite, authentic writings. What's called Herodotus's history. Herodotus's. Well, this book that is actually writing, and classical scholars refer to this book frequently. This book was written in 5th century BC, 500 years before Christ was born. The earliest copy that we have is AD 900. So, a 1300-year gap. Then there's Caesar's Gallic Wars. That was a 950-year gap between the original copy and the original manuscript and the first copy, nearly a millennia. Also, nearly a millennia. There's a book called Livy's Roman History, 900 years between the original copy and the first, nearly a millennia. Now, how does the New Testament come into this? Well, the books of the New Testament were written between 40 AD and 140 AD, and the earliest copy that we have was 130 AD. Sorry, between 40 AD and 100 AD. The earliest copy we have is 130 AD. We have a full manuscript of all the 27 books of the Bible by 350 AD. So depending on how you want to look at this, at most, there's a 300-year gap. And at the very least, there's only a 30-year gap before the first copy was made. So then we explore, well, how many copies? Once again, that beautiful word. Let's go slowly. Herodotus's histories. Whew. Can you help me, Matt? Come on, bud. You read this on the toilet, we know. Of this wonderful book, we have 8 copies. Caesar's Gallic Wars, we have 10 copies. Livy's Roman History, we have 20 copies. The New Testament, we have 24,300 copies. 5,309 in the Greek manuscripts, over 10,000 Latin manuscripts. Greek was what the New Testament was written in. Latin was when the whole Bible was compiled, what it was mostly translated into for roughly 1,000 years. And then 9,300 others. So just looking at this textual criticism, the New Testament stands by itself in every way, shape, and form of its trustworthiness. So now we need to look at the content. And in this book, 24,000 copies, only roughly at least a 30-year gap, this book we can trust. It again and again and again talks about Jesus Christ. So, in this book of New Testament, who was Jesus then, as we're looking at today? Was he a teacher? Was he a prophet? What can we learn about Jesus Christ? First and foremost, we know he was fully human. We read about him being born, we read about him being raised, we read about him being hungry, we read about him being thirsty, we read about him being tired. He had human emotions. We read about him loving things, finding a joy in things, finding a sadness in things. He had human experiences. He was fully human. And that's where most people would stop. Yeah, I completely agree. Yet again, 2/3 of the world right now will say Jesus was definitely real. I can believe he was real. I can believe he walked the earth. I can believe he was a great teacher. I just don't know if he was God. You would echo one of the greatest Scottish comedians ever, Billy Connolly. I won't go on. I just can't believe in Christianity, but I think Jesus was a wonderful man. Does that sound like most of the people we would know who wouldn't call themselves Christians? He was a great religious teacher like Buddha or Gandhi. There's another view of looking at Jesus, and to pull pop culture into it to a degree. Bono was getting interviewed one day, and the interviewer said, Christ has his rank among the world's greatest thinkers, but don't you think Son of God is a bit far-fetched? And Bono replies, no, it's not far-fetched at all. For me, you see, the secular response to Christian story always goes like this. He was a great prophet, and obviously a very interesting guy. But actually, Christ doesn't allow you to think that. He doesn't let you off that hook. Christ says, I am God incarnate, or in the flesh. So, what we are left with is either that Christ was who he said he was, or he was a complete nutcase. I'm not joking. Here, the idea of an entire course of civilization over half of the globe could have its fate changed and turned upside down by a nutcase, for me, that is what is far-fetched. So, what evidence do we have that would point to just maybe this guy Jesus, who by now we are trusting the New Testament. By now we are leaning to the truth that he definitely existed and lived and walked the earth. Well, what did he say about himself? And what could we learn that just maybe he might have been greater than a religious teacher? First question we have to ask is, who did Jesus think he was? Some say Jesus never actually claimed to be God. And to a degree that is true. Jesus never walked around going, I am God, I am God, I am God, I am God, I am God. But there are definitely things that point to his conviction and belief that he was God. First and foremost, his teaching centered around himself. Every other great religious teacher that we have will say something along the lines of, I am not God, but let me show you God. And Jesus 100% centered his teaching on himself. He has in the book of John the 7 great I ams. Let me break it down like this. Break it down. Do people say that anymore? Let me explore that topic like this. I feel like a 90s hip-hop artist. Let me further unpackage this for you. In every human heart, there is this hunger that leading psychologists of the 20th century continued to recognize and point us to, this inner hunger. Jung said that people are hungry for security. Alder said people are hungry for significance. And Freud said people are hungry for love. And Jesus said, I am the bread of life. If you want your inner hunger satisfied, his answer was, come to me. It's right there in bold and underlined at the top of the wall. Many people, I would say more so than ever today, whether it's just because it's a conversation coming to the light so people are comfortable talking about it, or because of some other factors, but many around the world today are living in a state of depression, living with a weight of despair. For many people, it is an emotional darkness, and Jesus stood up very clearly and confidently said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me, his exact words, will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. One testimony I looked at from Alpha I really liked. It says, it was as if the light had suddenly been turned on and I could see things for the first time. Many today are fearful of death, and we try to actually avoid talking about it. We don't do death well in the West. Jesus' comfort to us was, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, once again, his words, not mine, those who believe in me will live, even though they die. Mother Teresa, one of the greatest examples of the love of God in the last 100 years, an incredible missionary into India, just before she died, was asked, are you at all afraid of dying? Her answer was, how can I be? Dying's going home to be with God. I've never been afraid of it. I'm actually looking forward to it. Others throughout history, again and again and again and again, have said, that is the way. That is the truth. And look over here, that is the life. And Jesus didn't apologize or relent when he said, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. While he didn't walk around saying, I am God again and again and again, his teaching centered on himself. He said to receive him was to receive God. He said to welcome him was to welcome God. He said to have seen him was to have seen God. What about his indirect claims? If this was a religious teacher, if I could be so bold for a moment, I'd like to compare his work and statements just to myself, just for a moment. I've been teaching in this church for 17 years. If I could fall into the category of religious teacher like some people put Jesus, let's compare what he did and said and see how you would feel if I was to stand up and do it and say. Mark chapter 2, verse 5, Jesus, seeing their faith, said to the paralyzed man, "My child, your sins are forgiven." Didn't walk around saying, "I am God," but he claimed to be able to forgive sins. Now, each and every one of us sitting here today has the ability to forgive someone who's hurt them. I forgive you. But who has claimed the ability to forgive someone of their own wrongdoing before God? Imagine if I did that. I stood up. Actually, it sounds like another part of the church. If you paid this much money. No, anyway. I don't think you would be comfortable sitting here today if I claimed to have the power to forgive you of your sins. In fact, it was seen as such blasphemy at the time. The lawyers picked up stones. Oh, it's a different story. But they said, "Who can forgive sins but God alone?" They were so confused. I love the second one. Imagine if I did this next Sunday. Matthew 25:31. But when the Son of Man, Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man time and time again, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Jesus claimed that he was the one who will one day judge the world. Yet again, if you come next Sunday and I start dividing the congregation. David and Renee Taylor, you've been pretty good. Fossils, you're pretty good. Come over here into this pen. Vandersluises, we need to have a chat. There's a gate here called goats. Just don't ask questions right now. I'll get to you when it's your time, Mark. Understandably, you would be trying to find the nearest exit. I think that would make sense because it would be crazy coming from me. But here's something that's actually the clincher for me in this passage of Scripture. Jesus not only claimed to have the ability to judge the world, it says he will judge the world based off how they responded to him. That is a big claim. That's his indirect claims. What about his direct claims? In John chapter 20, Jesus has died on the cross, risen again. The resurrection has happened. The disciples don't know the resurrection's happened, and they're confused at this time, and they're hearing about his resurrection, and they're in the upper room. And as every group of 11 men sitting there quiet, depressed, and flat would feel, I can only understand, of what I hear, it's what New South Wales supporters feel like regularly, but I don't, as a Queensland supporter, I haven't felt that much in the last 15 years. But just picture these 11 men just depressed and sad, way down. And one of them, Thomas, speaks up, as a great friend would do. And he's like, I'm going to go. I'll get some food. He's running down to get pizzas and chicken wings and cheer the guys up with Sunday afternoon football. And the funniest thing happens, obviously the pizza's a lie, but that Thomas was gone. And Jesus comes and appears to the other disciples. And when Thomas comes back, Jesus is gone, the disciples are like, you won't believe it. Jesus was just here in his body. Bodily form. Thomas refuses to believe it. And I empathize with this so much. I remember being in high school actually wanting the message of Jesus not to be real because I was surrounded by a bunch of non-Christian friends. And I knew in my heart, if this is real, I have to give him my life. I can't live for myself. That was one thing I knew. So I was like, I actually don't want to believe this just because my parents do. I'm going to explore this. I had a desire for it not to be real. Thomas is the same thing. He's like, I'm not going to believe. I don't believe you unless I can put my hand in his wound in his side and the wound holes in his hands. Unless I can touch them, I don't believe. Now, verse 28 on the way, where is it? Jesus appears to all of the disciples later, including Thomas, and Jesus welcomes Thomas. He shows Thomas the wounds. He says, look at my hands, put your hands here. Look the wound in my side, put your hands there. And after this wonderful moment, we see in verse 28, Thomas says to Jesus, my Lord and my God. Thomas in that moment calls him God, and something significant happens. Jesus doesn't correct him. Every time we read about an angel appearing in the Bible, someone bows down to worship, they are immediately rebuked. Don't worship me. You can't do that. I'm a servant of God, just like you. And Jesus allows it to happen. Something different is happening. Jesus' response was, because you've seen me, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. In John chapter 10, verse 30, we read, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him to death. But Jesus said, I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? Their response is, we are not stoning you for any of these, but for the blasphemy, because you, a mere human being, claim to be God. Once again, he didn't go around clearly saying, I am God, but again and again and again and again, we see a clear message that he saw himself as God. So how can we test these claims? How can we test Jesus? How can we be confident if he claimed to be the unique Son of God that he was actually right? Well, first thing, we have to explore the three logical possibilities of his claim. Number one, Jesus claimed to be God. The first possibility is that it was not true, but Jesus wasn't aware it wasn't true. He thought he was God, but it wasn't true. So the outcome of number one is that Jesus was insane. The second possibility is that it wasn't true and Jesus was fully aware it wasn't true, which would make him quite an evil imposter. The third logical possibility is that it was true. Jesus of Nazareth was and is God. C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, put it like this: a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He'd either be insane or else he'd be the devil of hell. Once again, quite an evil person to manipulate and trick the world. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else insane, or something worse. But don't come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He hasn't left that open to us, and he didn't intend to. So he claimed to be God from the start. Yet again, we can see testimony of him outside of Scripture. We can trust the New Testament through how many copies and how quickly copies were made of the original manuscript. So we can trust the New Testament. Within the New Testament, we see again and again claims and indirect claims that he was God. He was convinced he was God. So now looking at this deeper, what evidence is there to support his claim that he's God? There's 5 pieces of evidence that Alpha brings up. First and foremost was his teaching. Jesus' teaching has become the foundation for entire civilizations. Laws that we have today are still based on his teaching 2,000 years ago. We are making progress in every field of science and technology. We can travel around the world faster, we know more, yet in 2,000 years no one has improved on the moral teaching of Jesus Christ. They're the greatest words ever spoken. They're the kind of words you would expect God to speak. So what we have to ask ourselves is that kind of teaching possible to come from someone who is evil or insane? What about his works? Some people say Christianity is so boring. And I would agree with you in many places. But Jesus was anything but. Jesus raised the dead, fed the multitudes, healed the sick, calmed the storms, and walked on water. He was anything but humane and boring. What about his character? Famous US magazine Time called Jesus the most persistent symbol of purity, selflessness, and love in the history of the Western man. British journalist Matthew Paris, who describes himself as an avowed atheist. When writing for the magazine The Spectator, he said, "I've got such huge respect for Jesus because his life was so radical. If Jesus had not existed, the church definitely would not have invented him." And then, of course, out of his character, the real test comes when someone is under pressure, when we're in pain and exhausted and sitting there. What comes out? Jesus, when in excruciating pain, about to go to the cross, he'd been beaten, he'd been whipped, he'd had his beard ripped out, he's been betrayed by friends. In that moment of almost death, what comes out of him is, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. His enemies could find no fault. Even Pontius Pilate said, this man has no sin. The fourth thing, it's a powerful thing. What about his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy? I like this one. This is a really cool one. No one in the history of the world has had a whole collection of books written about them before they were even born. The Old Testament book of Micah, chapter 5, written 700 years before Jesus was born, we read the prophecy that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem, and in the Gospels we see the fulfillment of that prophecy. It's not just one or two prophecies, though. In Jesus' lifetime, he fulfilled over 350 prophecies, written hundreds of years about him before he was born. 29 of these prophecies Jesus fulfilled in a single day. Now, if you're like me, you're probably sitting here going, that's easy. He knew the Bible well, the law well. He went back and studied these works and said, what must I do to fulfill these prophecies? That makes sense. However, what doesn't make sense and what is out of his control is many of these prophecies were about where he would be born. Even many others were about how he would die. Things completely out of his control. So that would have been a bit difficult to make happen. Well, the fifth piece of evidence I'd love to look at about the validity of Jesus' claim is his conquest of death. It is the biggest thing, church. Be assured that we all hinge on the resurrection. Many people believe in Jesus' life, his teaching, his works, his character. Christianity, a life transformed, hinges on, did he rise from the grave? The physical resurrection of Jesus is everything. The writer and atheist Richard Dawkins said this, if the resurrection is not true, Christianity becomes null and void. And I completely agree. So, almost there. But I do want to look at a few more pieces of information and evidence. I think if this is such a crucial thing, this resurrection, why could we believe it? How could we believe it? First thing is the absence of the body from the tomb. We have to be confident. There are many theories over the year why the body was absent from the tomb from that very first Easter day, but none are actually satisfactory. First of all, it's been suggested, well, maybe Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He just fainted from the pain, recovered in the cool of the tomb, got out of the grave clothes, pushed away the stone, and ran away. A couple of points there. Number one, he'd undergone a Roman flogging. He was beaten. 40 whips was said to have killed a person. He got 39. His body was then crucified. If somehow he fainted, it was after being whipped, after being beaten with nails driven through that part of his hand and his feet, while in asphyxiation, pushing himself from his feet up to take even one breath. If you faint and pass out, you can't push yourself up to take a breath. Not many people survived the Roman crucifixion. I think we could say no one confidently. His body was wrapped in grave clothes and placed in a tomb cut out of rock. But here's the thing, the stone rolled in front of the tomb that he apparently rolled away weighed 1.5 tons. Not easy to move at the best of times. Especially then, it was being guarded by Roman soldiers who were trained to kill people. So another stance, well, maybe the disciples came and stole the body. Began the rumor that Jesus was risen. My thoughts is if fishermen overpowered trained Roman soldiers, that's the first miracle we see. But the second thing is they didn't go on to live glorious lives filled with holiday houses and excess money, but all of them were brutally murdered holding on to this apparent lie. Every single one of them tortured and killed for their faith, excluding John the Apostle. Others have said, well, maybe the authorities stole the body. My guess is Based on historical facts of how much the Roman Empire hated Christianity and tried to eradicate it by having Christians killed horrible ways, Roman crucifixions as well, or put in the Colosseum and eaten by lions, they were trying to squash this religion. I don't think they would have fed into the lie. All they would have had to do if they stole the body is produce the body. When all these Christians were saying they stole the body, they just simply had to go, no, we didn't. Here he is. And Christianity dies. But they couldn't produce a body. So, second thing of evidence of his resurrection was his presence with the disciples. A lot of people have said this is just a hallucination. They all imagined it. They're all convinced of it. That's why they all died horrible deaths for their faith. But this is all just a hallucination. Now, having not done hallucinogenic drugs before, I'm only guessing. But of what I hear, hallucinations aren't shared by many, many people. There's nothing objective that shares them. They are subjective, and each person has their own unique hallucination. So, I don't think it's likely that the 12 disciples had the same hallucination. And if we can trust 1 Corinthians 15 that said Jesus appeared to 500 people at one time. And when writing that passage, Paul said most of them are still alive today. In other words, go and ask them. They're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're your work colleagues. They're still alive today. I don't think a combined hallucination can be shared by 500 people. Luke chapter 24, verse 36, while they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking that they saw a ghost. So he said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do doubts rise in your mind? Look at my hands and my feet. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." When he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They gave him a piece of fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Very physical revelation and moment. All of this had an immediate effect. It transformed the disciples from being fearful, depressed fishermen to go out and transform the world. The birth and explosive growth of the Christian church is a sign of something shifting in that moment. I'll finish with this. The final thing is, what evidence do we have that Jesus did rise again and it was real? Maybe the fact that billions of Christians around the world testify to actually experiencing it. I love this. Every continent and every tribe and every nationality and every economic situation, every social, intellectual background, all unite in this one common experience. I have experienced Jesus. And there's this tough thing. If you've experienced Jesus, then it's not a scientific thing we could prove. If you're out studying right now and you want to do a bachelor, master's, or even PhD in the topic of love, you could write all about love. You could study love. You could comment on historians on love, but you don't understand love until you experience it. In the same way, I stand before you as someone who 23 years ago, I think for the very first time in my heart, experienced the love of Jesus Christ. 13 at a youth camp, 15 actually, started preaching here, and at 19, committed my life to this place. And there's so many facts and logical things I want to talk to you about today, but when it comes down to it, I've experienced him. And I'm not inviting you to just have some head knowledge and you walk out of here today. I'm inviting you to experience the one true God. So in conclusion, once again, of everything we've talked about today, there are only three options. Jesus was either insane, evil, or he was God. Might seem out of place, but there's an old quote from Sherlock Holmes that says, "When we have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Surely you and I can eliminate as impossible that Jesus was insane. Changed the world. His teachings changed the world. His followers changed the world. Surely we can eliminate as impossible that Jesus was evil. Therefore, as Sherlock Holmes puts it, whatever remains, however improbable or hard for you to believe, must be the truth. Final thing, I love this. Yet again, C.S. Lewis, greatest mind, such a brilliant thinker, says we're faced then with a frightening alternative. The man we're talking about was and is just what he said, or else insane or worse. Seems obvious to me that neither he's insane nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. Today, I would love to pray with anyone who has never experienced Jesus Christ. First and foremost, we're going to worship in a moment. And as we sing this song, I would love to invite you into a space where no one's talking, no one's coming up to you. You're staying where you are, but you close your eyes and you open your heart. If we could do that now, could we stand to our feet? And worship isn't just part of our order of service. It's a response of a transformed life. So Christian, don't let this be part of the service. Let this be a response to Jesus transforming your life. And yet again, if you're here and you would not call yourself a Christian when you walked in, I invite you in this moment, just trust me. If you are willing to take time to close your eyes, open your heart to the possibility, however improbable, the possibility Jesus was who he claimed he was, the one true God. Say, Jesus, I want to experience you. If you want to open your heart, we're going to worship now. And as the worship leader sings these words over you, I want you to have a moment with Jesus. As we get ready, as we finish worship, Graham's going to close the service. I'm going to wait down the front. The team are going to wait down the front. If you are willing, we'd love to meet you. We'd love to pray with you. We'd love to give you a free Bible and help you start this journey with the reality and person, the one true God, Jesus Christ. Let's worship together.
You were near, and I was distant, disillusioned. I was lost and insecure. Still merciful for my attention. You were waiting at the door, and I let you in. Trading your life for my offenses, for my redemption, you carried all the blame. addition, perfection took our place. When only love could make a way, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. Sing my burden erased, my life forgiven. There is nothing that could take this love away. And my only desire and sole ambition is to love you just the same. When only love could make a way, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. Sing my name. When only love could break these chains, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Sing holy. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Holy are you, holy are you, God. Holy is your name, holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Holy is your name, holy is your name. My heart will sing how I love you. Sing holy. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Yeah. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Holy are you, God. Holy is your name. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. Sing holy, holy are you, God. Holy is your name. With everything I've got, my heart will sing how I love you. When only love could make a way, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. When only love could break these chains, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. Sing that one more time. When only love could make a way, you gave your life in a beautiful exchange. When only love. When only love could break